Hello and welcome to third part of creating our tender and intimate cue, where we now have all the parts in place, and what I need to do is I'll have a chance to show you how I'm going to finish this off now, because I've got hidden tracks in my template. I've got 6 of them, and these are going to be the stems that I'm going to create from these tracks, and they are going to be audio stems, so that'll be an interesting step that I don't think I've shown before, so I'll maybe use the pause button a little less when I'm going through that bit. First thing I'm going to do is label these up properly, and I'm going to shuffle them around a bit and color code them so we've got 5 or 6 groups. We'll see how that turns out in a second after I've paused. Right, that's tidied things up a little bit, and we've color coded things. What you can see is I've actually got the piano and the Sequus synth. They're doing an ostinato part, so I've put those together. Bass on its own. All the strings, the violins and the violas, are going to be one stem. I've got the cello and the horns. I'm going to put them together on their own stem, because they are the melody line, which I will want to be able to take out of a mix. Acoustic guitar, there's obviously only that ending note, but they're going to end up on their own. And the drums and the cymbals, that's going to be the percussion stem. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stems that we're going to end up putting together. Now, I'm going to sort of do this in a different way. What I'm going to do is set up the reverbs that I want first. So for example, if I want a hall reverb, which I will want, so we're going to get that Air Studio reverb. The general hall, remember, because this is on an auxiliary track, the output is 100. I'm going to leave it as the basic hall. I will do different ones for the percussion, so they are set back a bit. Other than that, all I'm now going to do, so I've got that set up here. So we've got reverb hall. I'm going to set its input to be, let's start on bus 10. And all I now need to do is add in sends from each of the tracks. So I will be going through each of these, listening to that. If the hall doesn't work, I will set up a different reverb. And remember to put your volume up. That's too much. That probably isn't going to need any. And this is about using your ears to just check the bit on its own. Okay, so there we go. We've got the first part done. And I'm going to go through the rest and pause it while I do that. As it turns out, it worked really well with that one reverb. So just using the hall, what you can see is I've gone through each one and varying amounts of reverb. The only one I haven't added reverb to is that synth patch, which has already got its own built-in sort of reverb. You can hear the difference probably at this transition point as the drums come in. So if I mute the reverb, this is what it sounded like before. And if we put the reverb back in, so you can hear the drums are in their own nice space now. the strings are being a bit more glued together. So what I also did with these is I've done stereo pan, because that's the one that tends to work best, instead of just reducing one side of the stereo image, which is what it is on by default. I always change that to stereo pan. So I've got violins 1 on the left, violin 2 up the middle, and violas on the right. So plus 40 and minus 40 to give us a nice bit of stereo width. The drums didn't need quite as much reverb as the other tracks, and I think they work quite well now with the cymbals. Next step is to get these lined up into their stems, and I'm going to rename these stems. So that is going to be piano and synth. Then we've got bass, strings, melody, which is our cello and horns, guitar, and percussion. What I now need to do is make sure I am routing these to the correct audio outs. Let's do that. So if we go to bass, piano and synth, and so on. I'll pause it while I go through that. Okay, there is an extra step that we need to do, because if we're recording to separate stems, I want the reverb for each channel to come back to itself. So what I need to do is make sure I've actually got this whole reverb on the different instruments separately. So that's going to be the piano reverb. That's going to be reverb bass. Otherwise, you'd have one reverb channel with everything in, which means if you cut out, say, the melody, you'd still have the reverb coming in. And to finish it off, I need to do the guitar and the percussion. So you can see these are currently routed to bus 12. So all I do, I could do all of them at once. As I assign it to a new empty bus, it creates it for me. That's the guitars. And 15 is going to be percussion. Now I haven't changed any of these levels because I won't need to. So that's going to be the reverb for the guitars. That's going to be the reverb for percussion. All I need to do now is copy that Air Studios reverb into each. So I'm in the same position, I've just got different copies of them because the output from each of the reverbs needs to go to a different location. Then we'll have bus 22 as well. So we have these reverbs set up now for each of the 6 stems that we're going to create, and all I need to do is route the output, instead of them all going to the stereo output, which is where the audio tracks are eventually going to go. These need to go to the stem. So we've got the sound of the piano coming in, for example, which goes to bus 21, but we also need the reverb that's being added to go to bus 21 as well. The bass reverb has to go to the bass channel as well, and so on. I'll pause till I've finished that. Great, those are all set up now. So we've got our reverbs and our instruments going to the correct stems. Remember, if I press play now, you're not going to hear anything because there isn't anything actually on these audio tracks, and they're the only things that are receiving the instrument and the reverb. So nothing is actually then coming to the stereo out. If you put these on input monitoring, then it will come through to the stereo out, so you can hear what it sounds like. If we come over here, we can check that the reverb is working correctly. So I can now only hear the percussion track, and that should be receiving the reverb for the percussion. So if I mute the reverb percussion, you can hear it drops out. And that's exactly what I want printed on this stem track. So now the fun bit, what you do is record all of your tracks, and all I'm going to do is hit record and let it play through, and we will end up with audio files on each of these stems. All I'm literally going to do is press record, and then I'll show you the results when I come back. There you go. As if by magic, we now have our different stems. So I can take these out of record. I can now mute all the instruments that created the stems, and if I play it back, we should get the original sound with each track on its own reverb, with its own reverb. Let's get to the busy bit. And let's hear the melody. We got the melody earlier as well. The guitar is obviously later on. The great thing about this is, what I could now do is solo everything except the melody and export that as a narrative, which is basically the full track without a melody line in it. I can also do a drum and bass mix, so literally the bass and any drums and percussion. And that's pretty much it really. If I now want to go through and automate any of the levels in here, so what I've done now is applied the mastering assistant in Logic to these stems to bring them up to a sensible volume. I could use that as an output for each of these combinations that I was talking about, so drum and bass or the narrative track, and they'll have the same mastering on. If the library wants single stems that they can stack together and then master, you would turn off this mastering and do one at a time. So you would end up with 6 stems for each of these, so that at the library end they could choose to put them together in whatever order they want and apply their own mastering. That's another option that may come up, but ask the question, do they want it mastered by you, or are they going to do it at the end? That's it really. All I'm going to do now is say thanks for watching. Like and subscribe kind of helps the channel, would be much appreciated, and I'll play through the mastered finished version for you now.